As the planet of Serra fell victim to the Locust horde during the events of Emergence Day, the planet would be absolutely devastated. The Locust swarmed all of the big cities of the world, and whilst doing that would go on to wipe out billions of Serran lives, all to establish themselves as the dominant force on the surface of the planet. As they did this, their forces would also go on to take all of the Serran people's technology and turn it against them. But for the Serran people, there was one hope, and that was all thanks to the COG military units formed by the coalition of ordered governments. For years, these COG troops would fight off the mass hordes of Locust, losing millions in the process, but gradually gaining ground back from them and turning the tides of war. For many, Marcus Phoenix, the Coltrane and Dom would be remembered as the overall heroes of this war with the Locust, and would be the main reason the Serran people would be able to get back to a somewhat form of normality and rebuild their planet. However, one family would risk everything for their planet, losing most of their family members in the process. This family would be brave and enthusiastic in battle, would defend their brothers and sisters in a firefight, and when all hope was lost, would put themselves in harm's way so that the others could get away safely. This family would be known as the Carmine Family, a heavily militarized focused family that would at some point find themselves in the COG group known as Delta Squad, working under the leadership of Marcus Phoenix himself. But who were the known members of the Carmine family? What was their story? How did they die? And what is their legacy now that the Serran population fights off their new threat of the Swarm? Well, in today's video, we explore the lives of the Carmine family who joined the ranks of the COG. These are the stories of the Carmine family members from Gears of War. The Carmine family were always a heavily militarized family, with most of the members of the family being expected to join up. But it was said that they didn't do it because they had a sense of duty or honor or even patriotism, but in fact joined up because they simply loved to shoot guns, blow stuff up, and never turned down a knockdown, dragged out fight. On top of this, however, one member of the family would go on to set up a life insurance shop within the city of Halvo Bay, named Carmine Family Life Insurance, with its tagline being protecting the ones you love. The first Carmine that the stories speak of was the family member known as Will Carmine, who joined the Gears back during the early days of the Pendulum Wars. Joining the COG during this time, Will would go on to fight in the Pendulum Wars under the command of his father, who reported to his father, Will's grandfather. Will and his squad were fierce in battle and always got the job done, with one of their victories being solidified with a picture of them in front of the COG flag. Eventually, the Pendulum Wars would come to an end as the UIR signed an armistice. 6 weeks after this day of peace came about, Will found himself based just outside the city of Yanamont, within their forward operating base. As he sat in his room alone, he would look at that picture of his old squad, reminiscing about how the war was finally over and how he never saw this day coming. It was now time for Will to call it a day, as he went to turn in his trusted Mark I Lancer he named Nina. But before he could, the ground suddenly fell from under one of the recruits near him, and a giant hole suddenly appeared in the armory. Looking down into the hole, Will would suddenly come under attack from a corpse claw, which burst out from it. Will demanded he got his gun, Nina, back and fired back against the creature. But as he asked what that thing was, Locust drones now started appearing from the hole, and suddenly they were to be overwhelmed, with Will's friend Dane getting impaled by the corpse claw. Will was devastated by Dane's death and started blind firing on the drones. But as he went to reload, he was then grabbed by General Ram, who started to choke him. Will tried desperately to ask him what he was, but Ram did not reply and got a knife out to his throat and killed him instantly. Will Carmine became one of the first humans to die at the hands of the Locust, and because of that and how bravely he fought in all of his battles, especially his last, he would be remembered as a hero. But Will's death went on to inspire his relatives to join the fight and hit back against this new foe, and now that Emergence Day had begun, his younger relatives would put themselves at the front line to fight against the Locust. As the Seren population faced the Locust horde, Marcus Phoenix would be brought back into his role as squad leader after being labelled as a traitor for disobeying orders. As he was flown into action once again, he would go on to meet the first of the 4 brothers of the Carmine family, the second youngest child, known as Anthony Carmine. Anthony was born and raised during the final years of the Pendulum Wars, and was the younger brother of both Clayton and his unknown named brother, but was older than his 4th brother, known as Benjamin. When Emergence Day did hit 6 weeks after the final day of the Pendulum Wars, Anthony, his mother, and brothers all survived the initial attack. Because of these attacks on their homeland, Anthony grew up having nightmares every night about the Locust emergence holes, which scarred him in all of his life. As time progressed on during this war and Anthony eventually grew to maturity, he would go on to join the Cog army, along with his 3 other brothers. As he finally graduated from his academy, he was also the member of the class that was voted as being the most likely to get shot out in the field. But despite gaining this title, Anthony was extremely knowledgeable about Sarah's history, being labelled as an expert on all of it, even if he did look back at some of it, especially the Pendulum Wars, with rose-tinted lenses. With this knowledge of historical events, most significantly on the start of the Locust War, Anthony would go on to try and model himself on one of the Cog's fiercest warriors, and one that had earned a reputation as being the best warrior within the Cog, that soldier being Marcus Phoenix, who made a name for himself at the Battle of Aspho Fields. Now 14 years into the war against the Locust, Anthony was assigned to Delta Squad under the command of Lieutenant Kim. This crew's main goal was labelled as the Light Mass Offensive, and alongside Anthony would be Corporal Santiago and his idol, Private Marcus Phoenix himself. Anthony was amazed to see that he finally had an opportunity to work alongside the hero that was Marcus Phoenix himself, and wanted to make sure he proved himself during the battles they would find themselves in. Landing at Embry Square, Anthony and the Gears would fight off multiple drones who surprised attacked them as Colonel Hoffman told Delta of their new order, which was to locate Alpha Squad, who were earlier sent into this area. Eventually the squad would go on to find a group of dead Gears, but weren't sure whether this was Alpha Squad or not. Delta Squad would continue to fight against the Locust as they tried to get the light mass operation to be a success. During this, Anthony would go on to tell the rest of the squad about his nightmares, and on top of that would prove he was a fierce fighter, equally as fierce as Marcus and Santiago themselves. Eventually the squad would get to the House of Sovereigns within Etheria, and would fight off the rest of the Locust using the Troika. Carmine would join Kim to flank the inside of the House of Sovereigns entrance, and whilst they were initially successful, more and more Locusts emerged from their emergence holes. The 4 squad members would fight fiercely in this endless battle using the Troika to wipe out as many as possible. However, within this battle, Carmine's chainsaw bayonet mechanic kept jamming his gun, making it almost impossible for him to reload, leaving him as a sitting duck. Eventually the squad was able to clear the entrance of the House of Sovereigns as Carmine joined the squad in the courtyard. As they all came together, Carmine would explain his Lancer was completely jammed, and as he spoke to his fellow Gears after a long hard battle, an unseen Locust sniper would arrive on the scene and would shoot Anthony straight in the head, killing him instantly. The sniper would immediately retreat from the scene, meaning the rest of the squad could not retaliate and get revenge for their fallen brethren. For a few minutes after the event, the rest of the Gears mourned their fallen member, remembering his personality for being an extremely enthusiastic soldier with a gung-ho attitude, willing to put his life on the line. But after this small moment of mourning, the rest of Delta got back to the job at hand due to how significant this would have been in the war effort. But this wasn't the last Carmine the squad would bring into their group. Soon after their light mass offensive task, Anthony's youngest brother would seek to join the Gears like Anthony did before, and together with Marcus and his crew, would seek revenge on the Locust for killing his brother. Now was the chance for the next Carmine soldier, Benjamin Carmine. Benjamin Carmine is the youngest of the Carmine family, and for some reason when he was growing up had an absolute love for fire. Like with Anthony, Ben was also very young when the Pendulum Wars ended and grew up during the start of Emergence Day. With all of his elder brothers joining the Cog army, Ben would become extremely jealous of them, and his ambition was to join as soon as he could. But as the tragic event of Anthony's death took place, Ben was even more determined to join the ranks, and later that same year Ben would turn 18 years years of age and would be conscripted into the Cog army. Finally, a chance to prove himself in war, and like his brother before him, he was extremely enthusiastic to get his gun and kill as many Locusts as he physically could. Because of this determination, Ben was extremely focused within basic training, paying close attention to his instructors to memorize all combat maneuvers possible. One thing also took place during Ben's boot camps, and that was the endless discussions with his other recruits about what the origins of the Locusts actually were. Ben himself believed that the Locusts were just simply native creatures who came from Sarah, who had been living underground all of this time. However, he would also go on to consider his fellow trainees' theory about their existence, stating they were aliens from the planet Ricea, or one of Sarah's other moons, who fed off the substance known as emulsion. After Ben finished his training, he was immediately sent to the front line and was tasked with joining his brother's old squadron, Delta Squad. Honored to be joining his brother's past squadron filled with heroes who helped fight back against the Locust, Ben would now be a part of Operation Hollow Storm, an attempt to wipe out the remaining Locusts who had survived their original lightmass offensive. The now Sergeant Marcus Phoenix ran this operation, and Ben was now his new trainee. But things didn't get off to a good start though, as when Ben arrived within Jacinto Med, he would also go on to drop his own gun on his foot, leading to Lieutenant Anya Stroud labeling him as green as grass. This meant Delta needed to help train Ben even further if they were to have him be a true member of their squad. With this, they would go on to train him in an alley behind the hospital, teaching him how to use the TACCOM, how to reload and aim, how to toss a grenade correctly, as well as the golden rule of the gears, to take cover or you will die, something his brother learnt the hard way. Aware of all of this, Dom acknowledged his brother's passing and offered him sympathy. Dom would also go on to thank Anthony for his service, telling him that Anthony had died as a true hero. Training went well for Ben as he was finally ready to face the Cog's deadly foe. But as soon as Marcus and Dom left, Jacinto Med was attacked by the Locust and they needed to take action. Ben during this was able to round up a group of gears to help them fight and protect the hospital. But during this battle, however, like his brother before, Ben would have trouble reloading, and because of it would take cover inside the building's entrance to get his gun working correctly. Eventually the rest of Delta would find him and help fix his gun, and with it went on to continue to fight back against the Locust. With the defense of Jacinto Med now successful, Ben was praised by Marcus for doing a good job. This sat well with Ben as he tried to gain a high five from fellow Delta member Ty, but he still had more to prove, and hopefully that was to come in the operation they had been sent on. As Operation Hollow Storm started to kick off, Ben would be involved in multiple events where they would be challenged by the overwhelming Locust forces. Their new goal, however, was to dive into the inner hollow and continue their assault, hoping to finally wipe out all of the Locust and end this war. As the squad arrived on Dizzy's rig, they all prepared their grind lifts for dispatch, but were immediately attacked by Scourge, the High Priest of the Trinity of Worms and High General of the Locust Army. But sadly it was too late for Ben, Marcus and Dom to help defend the rig, as their pods were already sealed and ready for deployment, leaving Dizzy and Ty to defend the rig on their own. As the squad landed in the hollow in their pods, Ben found himself separated from Marcus and Dom, within close range of Echo 5. Ben was told to stay where he was and recoup with Echo 5 until Marcus and Dom got to him. But as soon as he was told this, Echo 5 and Ben came under fire from a large group of Locusts. Echo 5 were wiped out in the process, but Ben was able to defend himself and survive the attack as Marcus and Dom eventually arrived. During this trip, Dom and Ben would exchange in conversation, with Ben suggesting that Dom wouldn't have to suffer fumes if he just wore a helmet, in which Dom's response was to say if he wore a helmet, he wouldn't be able to see Locust snipers looking to kill them, in reference to Anthony's death once again. Eventually the squad would go on to witness something horrifying. The Locust had been sinking cities with a giant worm, a rift worm to be specific, a creature so big no gunfire could really affect it. Ben was horrified by this discovery and was terrified of what they had just witnessed and what it had been doing to the Serra people. This creature needed shutting down to stop it from sinking more cities. During their task, however, Delta Squad would also discover the Locust had been capturing and torturing prisoners on torture barges. This led the Gears to go and save the captured individuals, with the squad finding Ty in the process. Being extremely wounded by the Locust, Ty would go on to take himself out with a Nasher shotgun that Marcus would hand to him after seeing how much pain he was in. This whole event stunned Ben as he looked on in horror at Ty's damaged body and how he was mentally not with it anymore. After this event, Ben's mentality was to change. He was more fearful of death and what the Locust could do to him. As the squad continued on during their operation venturing through the sunken city, multiple Locust forces would attack them, forcing a retreat. Ben covered the retreat as they went on to the chopper, but in the defense would be shot in the shoulder and fall against the chopper, being pulled in by his squad. Luckily, the bullet did not go through the armor and he was okay. The squad had pulled through, but suddenly their chopper was hit by a large chunk of debris thrown by the riftworm, causing it to spin out of control. Ben in this was unable to hold on to something and because of it fell directly into the creature's mouth, screaming in terror as he did. The rest of the squad followed in suit and luckily survived the fall as they began searching for Ben. But luckily for Ben, he did survive the initial fall, but was immediately under attack by Nemesites, which overwhelmed him and knocked him to the ground. These parasites then dragged him across acidic spikes on the stomach of the riftworm and majorly injured him as he tried to desperately fight them off. Eventually the rest of Delta Squad found Ben, but it was too late. His body was too injured with all of his organs exposed. His last words were simply, "Tell my brothers, my ma, tell them I love them." As Ben faded away, Delta Squad collected his cog tags, as well as a letter he had written to his older brother Clayton with their plan of returning them to his family so they could say their goodbyes and see whatever he had written to them. Delta unfortunately had to leave Ben's body behind as their operation was still their #1 goal. Yet again, another Carmine had been lost during the Locust War, and sadly, it was Delta Squad who had to witness it. The two youngest brothers of their family both wiped out in horrific ways, but all was not lost as the war was nearing its end. It was finally time for their eldest to join their squad and end the war once and for all. It was finally time for Clayton Carmine to join their ranks and avenge his fallen brothers. As mentioned before, Clayton was the eldest of all of the Carmines and because of it was the first to sign up to the Cog army. Clayton knew he was a gear from an early age, so signing up to the army was extremely easy, especially with the family's mindset of being very pro-military. Clayton, when becoming a gear, quickly became renowned as one of the best, gaining a reputation as being a grub killer, as he would kill any Locust in a brutal fashion, as he just hated every bone in their body. After Anthony's death, Clayton was deeply upset and it caused him to become even more hateful against the Locust. During this time when Ben was still alive, Clayton was part of the 7th Mangler unit and during the 2-day operation known as Operation Hollow Storm was able to fight fiercely and survive the endless Locust forces. Soon after Ben's death, Clayton was then a part of the second wave of the operation where the Cog had found the Locust stronghold, Nexus, was beneath Mount Kadar. Clayton took part in the assault of the Kadar Valley and drilled into the inner hollow. Clayton, along with Private Samantha Bairn and thousands of gears, were able to destroy the Locust and their home. After this, he was able to then escape the city of Jacinto before the Cog could sink it to flood the hollow, which would go on to destroy all Locust civilization underground. After the evacuation of Jacinto, Clayton and the rest of the evacuated population moved to Port Farrell to hopefully rebuild. It was here where Clayton eventually learned of Ben's death, gaining his tags and his letter from Sergeant Phoenix. With this horrible news, Clayton got himself a tattoo dedicated to his lost brothers, Anthony and Ben, on his right shoulder. With this, his hatred grew more and more for the Locust, and every kill he made would be in the name of his brothers. But unfortunately, their time within Port Farrell would not last long, as the rest of the Cog moved once again to Vectes to escape the new Lambent invasion. During this move, Clayton would often go up to the pigs located there and just simply murmur bacon to them. But once again, Clayton evacuated Vectes aboard the CNV Sovereign as part of a response force of gears. 14 months passed after this evacuation, and Clayton went on to travel to the city of Hanover to search for supplies with his fellow gears, Damon Baird, Augustus Cole, and Samantha Bairn. During this scouting mission, the Gears would go on to find a stranded outpost that was still inhabited by survivors and not overrun by the Lambent. The stranded were extremely hostile towards the Gears, stating they'd only trade them some bacon for the exchange of Sam. Clayton was excited by the notion of bacon, but Cole refused. Eventually the stranded let them in, and most were amazed that one of the Gears was a once legendary thrashball player, Augustus Cole. After this exchange, the Gears would go on to fight off the Lambent in the nearby areas, still searching for resources to not only help them but also the stranded. As the Gears ventured on to another stranded compound, one sniper would get them in their sights and would shoot at Clayton's helmet. But luckily for him, the helmet deflected the bullet and Clayton escaped a terrible fate, the same one that his brother experienced. As the Gears continued on, Clayton started becoming filled with rage at the Lambent, saying he was sick of these creatures and yelling out in battle that he was doing this for his fallen brothers Anthony and Ben. Clayton became a fundamental member of the Gears. He was far more brutal in combat. He was much smarter, determined, and not as green like his younger brothers, meaning he was almost impossible to kill. Multiple events went on during these last few years of the war as the Cog tried desperately to find a solution to getting rid of the Lambent and any creatures formed by the emulsion. The biggest and final battle came at the secret facility called Azura. The goal here was to reach the Pinnacle Tower where Adam Phoenix was located and activate his device that would kill all of the Lambent and Locust. Clayton's role in all of this was air support. Here he would cut down several Lambent creatures and palace guards, attempting to stop Marcus and his squad. Not only this, but Clayton would also start circling and yelling insults at the Locust Queen Mira, who had arrived aboard her Tempest. But with this intimidation from Clayton, he then became a target to the Tempest, who attacked his chopper, taking it down in a flying wreck. Clayton cried out for help to his fellow Gears as they watched it crash into the ground, but they could not help him at all. Luckily for Clayton, he was able to survive the crash with his helmet being knocked off in the process. Retrieving his helmet, he was able to then clean it off and put it back on to then save another fellow Gear before several other Raven choppers arrived on the scene. Eventually the Cog were able to set off the emulsion countermeasure device and kill not only the Locust, not only the Lambent, but also the Locust Queen Mira, ending the war once and for all. Relieved that the war was now over, Clayton and the rest of his squad went to meet up with the rest of Delta Squad. But here they noticed something. Both Dom and Adam were not with them, leading to Clayton and his squad wanting to know what had happened up in the tower. After the Battle of Azura, Clayton was promoted to Chief Sergeant by the new Cog for his heroic actions. A lot changed during this time as New Etheria was built up. It was a new era for Sarah and its people, and hopefully time for prosperity. But unfortunately, a few decades later, a new threat fell upon the Seren people, discovered by Marcus Phoenix's own son, James. This new threat of the Swarm would take over the land, capturing humans outside of the cities and turning them into new warriors for their army. JD and his crew were then brought into the academy and trained by Clayton himself, using his experience from the Locust War to help teach the others skills, and also using his brother's deaths as a way of teaching them what not to do in battle and how to avoid death. But at this point in time, protests were also going on, hitting back against the Cog, with some saying their new rules and enforcement was too heavy-handed, as well as prioritizing New Etheria over the settlements, who were not being allowed their own culture and independence like they were promised. These protests came to a head in Lander Square within Settlement 2, as Cog soldiers and DBs were sent in to deal with the protesters. During this protest, the First Minister ordered James Phoenix to get the DBs to open fire on the civilians. This caused a massacre, with many of its population being wiped out. After this event, however, both JD and Dell left the Cog and became outsiders, and thus became enemies of the state. With this opening position, the First Minister appointed Clayton to be the Chief Settlement 2 security. As the Swarm got larger in their force and more confident in their attacks, Clayton would have to lead an evacuation of Settlement 2, as the First Minister saw a large force incoming. Clayton, however, was joined by his once trainees JD, Dell and Faz, as well as his once squad member Augustus Cole, and tried to fight back against the swarm. Eventually it became too much, however, and after all the others had safely escaped, Clayton was able to find a Raven and evacuate the settlement on his own. 5 months later, Clayton came back into the fray, meeting up with Delta One, telling them they need to plant target beacons within Old Etheria to make sure they can successfully use the Hammer of Dawn and protect the entrance to the city. Clayton would also later on go on to fight alongside Delta One as they fought off Onyx guards and the Kraken's advance. Here Clayton would help Kate fire the railgun at the Kraken, weakening it until the Hammer of Dawn was ready to finally take out the beast. Thanks to Clayton's help, all of the squad were able to take out the Kraken and survive the onslaught of their enemy forces. Once again, the eldest Carmine was a hero and had proven he was truly what a gear should strive to be. But during these events, Clayton wasn't the last member of the Carmine family to be involved in this war. In fact, his other unnamed brother after the Locust War was able to have a child of his own, and like all of the Carmines before, she became a cog. This Carmine would be his daughter, known as Elizabeth Carmine, and like her older relatives, would play a big part in the war effort. Elizabeth was the youngest Carmine out of them, being born in New Etheria after the Locust War. Being born in an era of peace, Lizzie was surrounded by stories of her uncle's heroisms during the Locust War, and was deeply inspired by him and his fallen brothers. When Lizzie eventually became an adult, it was almost certain that she would join the Cog army to follow in the footsteps of her uncle Clayton. During her training, Lizzie would go on to become a highly experienced gear as well as driver, serving in the motor pool of the Cog Engineering Corps as a Minotaur driver. During her years of service before the swarm attacked, Lizzie would rise to become the rank of corporal, as well as becoming one of the best drivers in the entirety of the Cog army. During her time within the Cog, she would also go on to meet and become friends with the Lieutenant James Dominic Phoenix, as well as Lieutenant Delmont Walker. And on top of all of this, she would also go on to get to know the Coalition Thrashball League president and former gear, Augustus Cole. In all of her time, Lizzie became greatly admired in her role and highly respected by all of those who met her. However, during the evacuation of Settlement 2 when the swarm finally invaded, Lizzie was to play a vital role in all of this. Here she was assigned to lead the Minotaur convoy sent to evacuate the residents of the settlement. As the city suddenly came under attack from the swarm, Lizzie went out of her way to aid every civilian she could. One example was when she rammed her Minotaur into a snatcher which was preying on civilians on the street. As Delta One started their defense on the settlement, James would go on to call for Lizzie for her assistance, asking her to pick them up over the radio, and without a second thought, Lizzie obliged and headed to them with evacuees within the vehicle. As her vehicle approached Delta One to pick them up, the swarm started to target them, knocking down a building in front of their route. JD saw this situation and knew he had to act immediately to save her and the civilians. Here he demanded that Baird activated the Hammer of Dawn despite not having full control over it yet. As the Hammer of Dawn activated, it would go on to obliterate the swarm, coming to attack Lizzie. However, during this, Baird lost his connection and the hammer continued to fire wildly and started heading towards the convoy. Eventually, the Hammer of Dawn hit the convoy, wiping out one of the Minotaurs. Luckily, the civilians in the other two managed to escape, but Lizzie was desperate to escape her own vehicle via the passenger side. However, the door had been warped shut, preventing her from opening it and trapping her inside. Lizzie was relieved to see the civilians leave, but JD did not want to just leave her there whilst the Hammer of Dawn was still active. And as he tried desperately to open it, it became clear it was too late. Eventually, the malfunctioning Hammer of Dawn fired on the truck, killing Lizzie in the explosion, once again giving the Carmine family yet another loss. Lizzie, whilst not having much of a long service record like Anthony Carmine, went down as a hero, as her actions saved lives that day and her good intentions really showed through. For Clayton, this was another devastating loss for him, as he was now mourning for not just his brothers, but now his niece. But there was one final Carmine to appear to help JD in all of this. But to the rest of the Carmine family, this member was to be seen as the black sheep of the family. This member would be known as Gary Carmine. Gary Carmine was a real unknown for most who learnt about the Carmine family. Being born in the same year as the Locust War's end, Gary Carmine became the black sheep of the family, as he was incredibly independent and heavily critical of the cog. But despite all of that, he still absolutely idolized his fellow family member Clayton Carmine and saw him as a true hero, having the phrase grub killer sewn into his jacket. Being extremely anti-cog, Gary eventually left any society run by the First Minister and joined a group of outsiders at Fort Umpson led by Rainer Diaz. Gary didn't have the same military training like his other relatives and instead was trained by Rainer's brother-in-law, Oscar Diaz. It didn't take long before Gary became an incredible combatist, becoming so skilled that he started teaching the rest of the members of the village how to be smart in combat. But their true combat skills were put to the test when the new outsiders JD, Kate Diaz, Del Walker and Oscar came to the village with a fabricator from Settlement 5. Entering the village, this caused the First Minister to chase them down as she went on to send her command bots and a kestrel to talk to Rainer about the recent kidnappings of her people, accusing the villagers of taking them. During these debates, Rainer destroyed the command bot and ordered Gary to destroy the kestrel before it could do any damage. The First Minister then sent her DBs to attack the village, and with that order, all of the village jumped to its defenses, with Gary manning the turret on the exterior wall, destroying the condor that came in. But sadly, like almost all of the Carmine family, this attack on the village would end in his death, as a second condor flew overhead, dropping DB pods directly on the wall, hitting Gary and wiping him out completely. To this day, only two members remain of the Carmine family, those being the war hero that is loved by all, Clayton Carmine, and his unknown younger brother and father of Elizabeth Carmine. This family would forever be known as some of the bravest within the cog, doing everything they could to stand out and be heroes on the battlefield. Whilst they might have lost all of their family members, their actions will always be remembered and their legacy will live on forever. Will Clayton continue to be a hero as the cog fights back against the Swarm and Locust, or will there be more Carmines out there somewhere in Serra? Or has their legacy come to its conclusion? Only time can really tell. But for now, this has been the story of the incredibly brave and gung-ho family known as the Carmine family from the Gears of War universe. And that is all for now. I want to say a huge thank you to you for watching this video, as well as my amazing patrons who allow me to make videos like this, including our small fishes, our big fishes, Christopher, AVP Man, Last Persona User and Artocrem, our YouTube wise ones, Jambu, Fiery Italian and Ico the Wolf, our sharks, Whale Such Gaming and Jason X117, our huge megalodons, Sinus and Jacob Garcia, and our absolutely legendary starfish, Shadow SGT. If you also want to support this channel, you can find the link in the description below, but if not, please do leave a like. Check out my other lore videos in the playlists below in the description. Leave a subscribe if you haven't already, as well as a nice comment to help with our Lord and Saviour, the algorithm. But that's all for now. Thanks again, and see you all in the next one. Cheers.